I have spent decades protecting secrets that could burn Hollywood to the ground. Everyone thinks they know the story of my 7 husbands, but they don't even know who I am. To survive, I had to become a ghost, and now, I'm finally ready to tell you where the bodies are buried. In the humid air of 2017 Manhattan, Monique Grant is a woman treading water. A writer for Vivant magazine, she is talented but struggling, her career stalled and her marriage to her husband, David, recently fractured. When her editor, Frankie, summons her with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the confusion is as thick as the ambition. Evelyn Hugo, the legendary, reclusive film icon, has agreed to an interview for the first time in decades, but she has set one impossible condition. She will only speak to Monique. Monique wonders if her father, a man who worked in Hollywood until his death, might have known the star, but her mother dismisses the idea. Regardless of the why, Monique knows this is her chance to finally become the writer she was meant to be. She researches the icon, lost in old film clips and photographs of a woman who always seemed to leave her audience wanting more. She reads of the 12 famous gowns Evelyn is auctioning for charity, each a relic of a curated life, and prepares to meet the woman behind the emerald silk. When Monique finally steps into Evelyn's opulent apartment overlooking Central Park, she is met with a beauty that has not faded, only hardened into elegance. But the interview is a ruse. Evelyn informs Monique that she has no interest in a magazine feature. Instead, she offers a multimillion-dollar confession. She wants Monique to write her biography, a tell-all to be published only after Evelyn is dead. Evelyn is cold, precise, and utterly without apology. She speaks of her sins not with regret, but as a map of her survival. She tells Monique to be ruthless, to get as much money as possible for the story, and to understand that the world does not give, it only yields to those who take. To begin the story of Evelyn Hugo, they must first strip away the blonde hair and the stage name to find a girl named Evelyn Herrera. The story begins in the gray, cramped streets of Hell's Kitchen. Evelyn was the daughter of Cuban immigrants, a girl who adored her mother, a chorus girl with big dreams, and feared her abusive father. When her mother died of pneumonia, 11-year-old Evelyn was left alone with a man who offered her nothing but pain. As she hit puberty early, she realized that the hunger in men's eyes was a power she could harness. When a local store clerk forced himself on her, she didn't cry, she demanded a trade, taking what she wanted from the store in exchange for the intrusion. It was her first lesson in the commodity of herself. By 16, Evelyn knew she had to leave New York or die there. She set her sights on Ernie Diaz, an older man with a ticket to Hollywood. She put on her favorite green dress, the color of money, ambition, and the youth she was about to discard, and seduced him. She lied about her age, married him, and used his move to California as her chariot. Arrival in Hollywood was not a fairy tale, it was a grind. Evelyn spent her days at a specific cafe, making herself visible to the right people. It was there she met Harry Cameron, a young producer who saw the fire behind her eyes. Harry became her mentor and her greatest ally. He told her the truth the industry wouldn't say aloud. Hollywood didn't want a Cuban girl with a New York accent. They wanted a white, blonde leading lady. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She dyed her dark hair a shimmering gold. She scrubbed the Spanish from her tongue. She shed Herrera and became Hugo. She posed for publicity photos that walked the fine line between wholesome and erotic, playing whatever part the studio demanded. When she wanted the lead role of Jo in Little Women, she bypassed the auditions and went straight to the source, Ari Sullivan. She slept with the producer to get the part, feigning pleasure and feeling only the satisfaction of a successful trade. With her career ignited, the studio realized Ernie Diaz was a liability. They orchestrated a divorce, and Evelyn played the part of the heartbroken wife for the cameras, while Ernie took the studio's settlement and walked away into a quiet life. Evelyn was now a star, and the public wanted a romance to match her stature. Enter Don Adler. He was the golden boy, handsome, successful, and seemingly different from the men who had used Evelyn before. For the first time, Evelyn felt herself falling for real. She loved the way he looked at her, the way they became Don and Evie in the tabloids. When he proposed on the red carpet, she felt like she had finally reached the peak of the mountain. Their wedding was a masterclass in Hollywood glamour, a sea of lace and flashbulbs. In a quiet moment away from the crowd, Evelyn spoke with Harry Cameron. She asked him why he, out of all the men in town, had never tried to sleep with her. Harry's answer was quiet but transformative. His heart belonged to men. In that moment of shared secrets, their bond became the most honest thing in Evelyn's life. They were two people wearing masks, holding each other up in a world that would never accept their true faces. Evelyn believed she had finally found safety in Don's arms. She was a power player, a wife, and a legend in the making. But the glamour was a thin veil. Only 2 months after the wedding, the golden boy showed his true self. Driven by insecurity and a need for control, Don's charm turned to violence. In the privacy of their home, the man the world adored raised his hand and struck her for the first time. The fairy tale was over, and the long, dark reality of being Evelyn Hugo had truly begun. I stood in a cramped laundry room, my signature emerald gown stained and my world tilting. I had spent years playing the roles Hollywood demanded, but in that moment, I realized the most dangerous thing I could ever be was myself. I wasn't just losing a husband, I was finally finding the woman I'd spent my life waiting for. By 1959, Evelyn Hugo was the woman every girl wanted to be and every man wanted to possess. On the surface, her life with Don Adler was a masterclass in Hollywood perfection. They were Don and Evie, the golden couple of the silver screen, their faces plastered across every magazine from Sub Rosa to Photo Moment. But behind the heavy velvet curtains of their home, the gold was peeling away to reveal a jagged, ugly reality. As Evelyn's star ascended, winning awards and drawing the adoration of the press, Don's career began to stagnate. The more the world loved her, the more he hated himself, and the more he took that self-loathing out on her. He demanded she shrink herself, take his name, and abandon her career to provide him with children. When she refused to be eclipsed, he struck her. The first slap was a shock that echoed the violence of her childhood, but it soon became a rhythmic, terrifying pattern. Evelyn became an expert at the most difficult role of her life, the happy wife. She used the same heavy makeup that transformed her for the cameras to hide the yellowing bruises on her ribs and the swelling of her jaw. On the set of their film One More Day, they sat on a fake beach under hot studio lights, playing at a romance that was rotting in real time. Don would apologize, his voice thick with a remorse that Evelyn desperately wanted to believe, but the cycle always returned. Even as they both earned Oscar nominations for the film, Evelyn knew she could never bear to watch it. To her, it wasn't art, it was evidence of her own endurance. The arrival of Little Women brought a new challenge in the form of Celia St. James. Cast as the frail Beth to Evelyn's headstrong Jo, Celia was everything Evelyn was not, a refined, up-and-coming talent who seemed to possess a natural, effortless grace. Initially, Evelyn viewed her with the sharp-edged jealousy of a woman who had fought for every inch of her territory. She assumed Celia was a threat, a girl who would steal the spotlight with a single wide-eyed look. But as they worked together, the walls began to crumble. When Evelyn lashed out at Celia, accusing her of being fake, she was met not with a Hollywood retort, but with genuine hurt. Evelyn realized that Celia wasn't a rival. She was a girl who felt just as out of place as Evelyn once had. They struck a bargain that would change both of their lives. Celia would teach Evelyn the nuances of true acting, and Evelyn would use her immense star power to pull Celia into the public eye. They became inseparable, a pair of sisters on screen and the deepest of confidantes off it. However, the press was beginning to sour on Evelyn. A biting article in Sub Rosa labeled her cold Evelyn, painting her as a selfish woman who refused to give her husband the family he craved. The source was her own maid, Paula, who had seen too much. Evelyn knew her career was at stake. In the 1950s, a woman who didn't want to be a mother was a villain. With the cold precision that had brought her from Hell's Kitchen to the heights of fame, Evelyn engineered a masterpiece of deception. She didn't fire Paula immediately. Instead, she staged a performance for an audience of one. She play-acted a gut-wrenching phone call with a doctor, weeping loudly enough for the maid to overhear a fabricated tragedy. Evelyn had suffered multiple miscarriages. When Paula inevitably leaked the story, the narrative flipped overnight. The cold actress became the suffering mother, and the public's sympathy returned in a tidal wave of support. Evelyn had used the world's traditional expectations of womanhood as a shield to protect her unconventional life. But the shield was beginning to feel like a cage. As she and Celia grew closer, spending nights drinking wine and sharing their real names and deepest fears, Evelyn realized her feelings for the other woman were shifting into something she didn't have a name for yet. The breaking point arrived at the premiere of Little Women. Evelyn sat in the darkened theater, watching Celia's luminous performance, and felt a rush of pride that eclipsed any desire for her own glory. But the night descended into chaos. In a laundry room away from the party's flashbulbs, another actress, Ruby Riley, sought to destroy the bond between them. In a fit of spite, Ruby spilled a green drink across Evelyn's signature gown and spat out a venomous truth. Celia was a lesbian. She added, almost as an afterthought, that Don was cheating on Evelyn at that very moment. In the 2017 penthouse, Monique Grant pauses, her mind racing toward a conclusion. She assumes Evelyn is coming out as a lesbian, but Evelyn stops her with a sharp, corrective grace. She identifies as bisexual, a distinction that matters deeply to her, even if the world has spent decades trying to erase it. As a biracial woman, Monique feels the weight of that correction. She knows what it is like to have the world try to simplify a complex identity into something easier to digest. Returning to 1959, the revelation in the laundry room didn't repulse Evelyn, it ignited her. She found Celia and, in a moment of terrifying honesty, kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of floral notes and new beginnings, a green world of growth that had nothing to do with the transactional sex of Evelyn's past. The fallout was swift and scorched the earth of her old life. Evelyn caught Don in his infidelity and used it as the lever to pry herself free. The divorce was a bloodbath for her career. Don was vindictive, ensuring that Sunset Studios, the home she had built her legend in, kicked her out. She was traded away to lesser studios, cast in bottom-tier films intended to bury her. But as she packed her bags and moved into Celia's apartment, Evelyn didn't feel like a victim. She had lost her contract, her husband, and her safety, but she had gained the only thing that had ever felt real. As she lay in bed beside Celia, the two of them navigating the quiet, platonic start of a forbidden love, Evelyn knew the road ahead was dangerous. They were two women in a town that burned people like them for sport, but for the first time in her life, Evelyn Hugo wasn't playing a part. She was home. I thought I was saving us when I walked down that aisle in Las Vegas, but instead, I was burning the only bridge that led back to her. A single night of playing a part cost me 5 years of silence, the longest, coldest years of my life. I learned the hard way that you can't protect a person by betraying them. In the 2017 penthouse, the air between Monique and Evelyn has shifted. The power dynamic is no longer that of an icon and a fan, it is a negotiation between two professionals. Monique makes a bold demand. She will walk away from the biography unless Evelyn agrees to a photo shoot. Evelyn relents, but the victory feels hollow to Monique. She realizes that in Evelyn's world, every concession is a trap, and every gift comes with a debt. As Evelyn prepares to dive back into the 1960s, Monique feels a creeping sense of dread, wondering what the final bill for this story will be. The 1960s began with Evelyn Hugo on the outside looking in. Blacklisted by the major studios after her messy divorce from Don Adler, she was forced to watch from the sidelines as the industry moved on without her. While Celia St. James soared toward an Oscar nomination for Little Women, Evelyn stayed behind closed doors to avoid the toxic glare of the press. On the night of the Academy Awards, Evelyn didn't feel jealousy. She felt a terrifying, consuming pride. As Celia's name was called for Best Supporting Actress, Evelyn was so overcome with joy that she lunged toward her television, kissing the glass screen where Celia's image flickered. She hit the glass so hard she chipped her front tooth, a physical crack in her porcelain perfection that she wore like a badge of honor. It was the only time she had ever valued a feeling more than her face. With her American career in ruins, Evelyn fled to Paris. There, she met the rising new wave director Max Gerard. He was captivated by her, seeing a depth that Hollywood had ignored. He cast her in Booty and Train, a film that required her to be topless. Rather than feeling exploited, Evelyn took command. She choreographed the film's most iconic moment, emerging from the water in a way that created unbearable desire in the audience, only to have the screen cut to black before they could see her breasts. She knew how to play with that hunger because she knew what it was like to want a woman. She gave the world just enough to make them obsessed, while keeping the truth for herself. The film was a global sensation, and Evelyn Hugo was once again the most sought-after woman in the world. She returned to Hollywood, but the danger followed her. At a Mick Reaver concert, seated between Harry and Celia, the mask slipped. In a moment of pure, unscripted happiness, Evelyn reached out and grabbed Celia's hand. It was a small gesture, but in 1961, it was a death sentence. When she saw a woman in the crowd notice the intimacy, panic set in. To save their reputations, Evelyn created a diversion. She caught the eye of the rock star Mick Reaver from the stage, sparking a media frenzy that buried the truth of the handhold. But the diversion became a nightmare. To fully scrub the rumors of her relationship with Celia, Evelyn decided to marry Mick. She calculated that a whirlwind elopement followed by a quick annulment would provide the perfect smoke screen. Celia was horrified, accusing Evelyn of loving fame more than her, but Evelyn insisted it was the only way to keep them both safe. On the night of the wedding in Las Vegas, Evelyn disappeared. You are standing in a cheap chapel, smelling the stale air of cigarettes and desperate luck. You look at Mick Reaver, a man you don't even like, and you pretend he is the center of your universe. You trick him into thinking your morals prevent you from sleeping with him before the vows are said. You drink, you gamble, and you walk down that aisle with a hollow chest. When the door finally closes on your wedding night, you perform. You make yourself a bad lover, a cold and undesirable wife, ensuring that by morning he will want nothing more than to be rid of you. You watch yourself from the ceiling, a stranger in your own skin, playing a role that earns you an annulment and loses you your soul. The fallout was catastrophic. When Evelyn returned, she discovered she was pregnant. The realization that she had slept with Mick shattered Celia. In a room thick with betrayal, they screamed truths that could never be unsaid. Celia called Evelyn a prostitute who traded her body for headlines. Evelyn fired back that everything she did, every marriage, every lie, was for Celia's sake. She told Celia that while Evelyn could be happy with a man and a family, Celia was the one who was trapped by her own nature. The words were poison. Celia walked out, and the silence that followed lasted 5 years. To endure the void Celia left behind, Evelyn retreated into her work. She took the lead in Anna Karenina, playing a woman shunned by society for her passions, a role that mirrored her own isolation. To ensure the film's success, she entered into an honest deal with her co-star, Rex North. They married for the cameras, a cold business arrangement designed to sell tickets. Rex was a professional. They lived separate lives, and Evelyn found a quiet comfort in the honesty of their lie. During these years, Evelyn hired a Salvadoran maid named Luisa. Luisa spoke Spanish freely, unaware that her employer understood every word. Listening to Luisa call her crazy in her native tongue, Evelyn felt a profound shame. She realized that in her quest for the throne, she had erased Evelyn Herrera so completely that even her own people didn't recognize her. Luisa became her anchor, a living reminder of the heritage she had traded for gold hair and an Oscar-winning name. The Rex North era ended when Rex fell in love with someone else. Ever the strategist, Evelyn didn't want a failed marriage on her record. She coordinated with Rex to stage a double infidelity scandal that would boost their latest film's box office. She called upon Harry Cameron to play the other man. As they sat in a car, waiting for the hired paparazzi to catch them in a scandalous embrace, Harry dropped a bombshell. He had been seeing John Braverman, the man Celia had married to hide her own secrets. They realized that they were all part of the same tangled web, for people living lives of quiet desperation to satisfy a world that hated them. In that car, in the dark, Harry proposed a different kind of marriage. Not one of business, like Rex, or one of escape, like Mick. He proposed a partnership of protection. They would marry, they would have a child, and they would create a home where they could finally be themselves behind closed doors. When the photographer finally arrived and the flashbulbs went off, Harry kissed Evelyn. It was a performance for the world, a racy image that would dominate the tabloids, but for the two of them, it was a vow. They were no longer just a star and her producer, they were a family. We were 4 people in wigs and glasses, eating sandwiches on a checkered blanket like any other family in the park. It was the only time in my life I felt truly undisguised, hiding in plain sight with the people I loved most. I didn't know then that the very thing that made me a legend was about to cost me everything. In 2017, the heavy silence of the Manhattan penthouse is beginning to weigh on Monique Grant. As she heads home after another day of unearthing Evelyn's ghost, she speaks to her mother, seeking a tether to reality. Her mother speaks of pride and her father's legacy, but Monique is drowning in a different sensation, dread. She calculates the timeline with a grim precision. She is less than 48 hours away from a revelation so potent she knows it will turn her admiration for the icon into hatred. The exhaustion of the interview process has stripped her thin, leaving her vulnerable to the looming shadow of a truth Evelyn is meticulously leading her toward. The journey to that shadow began in 1967, on a night of velvet and heartbreak at the Academy Awards. Both Evelyn and Celia sat in the audience as nominees, the air between them frozen by 5 years of silence. When Ruby Riley was announced as the winner, the professional blow was the final crack in Evelyn's composure. She fled to the bathroom, the smell of expensive perfume and hairspray cloying in the small space. Beneath the harsh glow of the vanity lights and against the cold, sterile tile, the door opened. It was Celia. In an instant, the 5 years of ice shattered. They were no long apologies, only a desperate, wordless reclamation as they found each other again. The fire that had been banked for half a decade roared back to life in a frantic moment of reconnect, hidden behind a locked stall door while the world outside cheered for someone else. What followed was the golden era of the Lavender Fortress. Evelyn, Harry, Celia, and John Braverman constructed a sanctuary of side-by-side living. To the public, they were two traditional, heterosexual power couples, the Four Beards. Evelyn and Harry shared a home, while John and Harry lived together nearby, creating a seamless loop of domesticity that masked their true identities. They relied on the world's heteronormative assumptions as their greatest shield. They went on double dates, laughing for the paparazzi, using the public's blindness to protect their private joy. This era was marked by the flickering blue light of the television as news of the Stonewall riots broke in 1969. In their living room, the group watched the uprising with a mixture of awe and agony. Celia, ever the most idealistic, felt a visceral urge to go down to the riots, to stand on the front lines and finally own her sexuality in the light of day. But the others, led by Harry's pragmatism, dissuaded her. They knew their fame would turn a political movement into a media circus, pulling focus from the cause. Instead, they retreated into the safety of their closets, choosing to support the fight with clandestine donations while remaining prisoners of their own legends. The sanctuary reached its emotional peak in 1975 with the birth of Connor Margot Cameron. For Evelyn, motherhood was a transformative grace. She and Harry shared a fierce, platonic love that was grounded in the protection of their daughter. Raising Connor as a collective unit with Celia and John gave Evelyn the family she had dreamed of in Hell's Kitchen. She finally felt like a wife and a mother in a way that felt authentic, even if the world only saw the performance. It was Celia who pushed Evelyn back toward the flame. Fearing that motherhood would cause the industry to desexualize Evelyn, Celia encouraged her to take a daring role in Max Gerard's new film, 3 a.m. The project required Evelyn to reunite with Don Adler, the man who had once been her greatest source of fear. But when they met for sandwiches to discuss the film, the power dynamic had shifted. Evelyn was the titan. Don was a man in professional and personal decline. He offered a heartfelt, responsible apology for his past abuse, and Evelyn, softened by the stability of her life with Celia and Harry, found the grace to forgive him. She felt so secure in her happiness that she believed she was untouchable. But Max Gerard was a director who dealt in the currency of truth, and he wanted more than a simulated performance. During the filming of a pivotal sex scene, he prodded Evelyn to show the world a woman's genuine pleasure. Under the heat of the studio lights, Evelyn made a choice that prioritized her artistic ambition over her partner's boundaries. She stopped acting. She didn't simulate the scene with Don. She accessed a raw, unmasked expression of her own desire. In that moment of creative honesty, she felt a thrill of professional daring, but as the cameras stopped rolling, a crushing guilt took its place. She realized she had given the world a part of herself that was supposed to belong only to Celia. The fallout was a slow-motion disaster. Evelyn returned home and tried to seek a retroactive blessing, but the confession was a poison. Celia could not bear the thought of Evelyn's private intimacy being treated as a public commodity, especially with her ex-husband. She refused to be just a part of a shared life that was constantly up for sale. Evelyn was desperate, a woman who had climbed every mountain only to find herself falling. She tracked Celia down, offering to walk away from Hollywood, to quit acting, to do anything to preserve the sanctuary. But Celia saw the truth with a clarity that Evelyn lacked. She realized that Evelyn Hugo was a creature of the spotlight, a woman who could never truly belong to anyone because she was obsessed with the image she had built. Celia walked out, and this time, the family unit collapsed entirely. The victory of 3 a.m. was a hollow, bitter thing. Don won an Oscar, while Evelyn was snubbed, the public judging her for being too sexual. She had traded her family for an artistic statement that the world threw back in her face. In the 2017 Penthouse, Evelyn admits to Monique that she was never a good person, and that her hunger for fame was the very thing that turned her life into a series of beautiful, empty gowns. I stood in the wreckage of a life I had spent decades building, the smell of alcohol and burnt rubber choking the air. To save the man who had been my only real sanctuary, I had to commit my most unforgivable act, a lie that would protect his legacy but haunt my soul. I was finally ready to leave Hollywood behind, but the price of my exit was written in blood. The long-guarded sanctuary of the Four Beards began to crumble with a sudden, silent heart attack. When John Braverman died, the foundation of their unconventional family vanished. To the public, John was merely a friend and a talented athlete, but to Harry Cameron, he was the love of his life, his silent partner for decades. Harry was leveled by a grief he was not allowed to publicly claim. He retreated into a fog of alcohol and depression, staying in bed for days while the world expected him to simply move on from a friendship. At the funeral, Evelyn watched the man who had been her architect and her anchor disintegrate. Across the aisle sat Celia St. James. They did not speak, but the air was thick with the weight of everything they had lost. Even young Connor, now old enough to notice the cracks in her parents' facade, could only recognize Celia as Beth from a movie screen. The family that had survived the scrutiny of Hollywood was finally breaking from within. Desperate to pull Harry from his spiral, Evelyn engineered one last professional triumph. She secured roles for them both in Max Gerard's new film, All for Us. It was a tactical success. Both Evelyn and Harry finally won the Oscars that had eluded them for so long. Standing on that stage, Evelyn accepted the golden statue not as a prize for her beauty, but as a coded message. In her speech, she alluded to Celia, a secret signal intended to pierce the decade of silence between them. The celebration of that night, however, led to a different kind of realization. Max Gerard, the director who claimed to adore her, took her to a Jack-in-the-Box in her ball gown to celebrate. When the limousine couldn't fit through the drive-thru, they went inside, and the legend of Evelyn Hugo was suddenly trapped. A mob of fans descended upon her like she was a caged animal, and Max, in an act that was both heroic and deeply objectifying, threw her over his shoulder to carry her back to the car. In the safety of the limo, he proposed, and Evelyn, starving for the sensation of being wanted, accepted. But the honeymoon period was short-lived. On their wedding trip to Joshua Tree, Evelyn looked at the man she had married and saw a stranger. Max wasn't in love with the woman who spoke Spanish with her maid or the mother who worried about her daughter. He was in love with the press photos, the box office numbers, and the Evelyn Hugo he had helped create. To Max, she was a trophy, a cinematic achievement to be possessed rather than a person to be known. In 2017, the resonance of this story finally reaches Monique Grant. As the interview winds down for the evening, she finds her husband, David, waiting at her apartment, seeking a reconciliation. In earlier months, Monique might have wavered, lost in the fog of heartbreak. But through Evelyn's eyes, she sees the distinction clearly now. Her marriage wasn't a tragedy, it was a failure of compatibility. She realizes she has been settling for a love that required her to hide her true self, just as Evelyn had done for decades. Inspired by the raw, flawed devotion between Evelyn and Celia, Monique finds the strength to choose her own freedom. She wants a love that is worth the fight, not a relationship held together by the fear of being alone. She sends David away, finally ready to face the final truth Evelyn has promised her. The 1980s brought a tentative, fragile healing. A secret correspondence began between Evelyn and Celia, a slow thaw of letters that bypassed the years of anger. But the reunion was underscored by a ticking clock. When they finally spoke on the phone, Celia revealed she was dying of emphysema. She had a decade left, perhaps less. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She was finally ready to give up the spotlight that had cost her so much. She told Max she was leaving him, and when he threatened to out her as a lesbian to the press, Celia proved she was still the master strategist. They crafted the Spain plan. Evelyn staged a fake, scandalous affair with a much younger congressman to distract the media. She painted Max's threats as the sour grapes of a jealous, jilted husband. To ensure their future, Evelyn prepared to marry Celia's brother, Robert, so that their assets would be legally protected. They were finally going home, not to a movie set or a red carpet, but to a beach in Spain where they could simply be two women who loved each other. But the exit from Hollywood required a final, bloody toll. Before they could leave, Evelyn came upon a horrific car crash on a dark road. Inside the wreckage was Harry and another man, James, the secret love Harry had found after John's death. James was already dead, and Harry was dying, the scent of alcohol heavy in the car. In a moment of chilling, old-school ruthlessness, Evelyn didn't just call for help. She saw the headlines that would destroy Harry's legacy and the scandal that would traumatize Connor. She moved James's body into the driver's seat, framing the dead man for the accident to protect the dying one from a manslaughter charge. As she worked, her driver, Nick, a young, ambitious actor, watched her with a predatory hunger. He saw an opportunity where Evelyn saw a tragedy. He agreed to the lie in exchange for the promise of fame. Looking at him, Evelyn saw her younger self, the girl who would trade anything for a lead role, and she felt a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She had spent her life manipulating the truth, and now, at the end of it, she was using her last bit of power to bury a man's identity to save a friend's reputation. Harry died in the hospital shortly after, leaving Evelyn as the sole guardian of a family that existed only in the shadows. In the 2017 penthouse, Evelyn's eyes are red with the memory of that night. She watches Monique, the woman she has chosen to carry this burden, and her voice is steady but hollow. She warns Monique once more, do not admire her. The story of Evelyn Hugo is not a fairy tale of a woman who had it all. It is a ledger of the things she broke to keep what mattered. Tomorrow, the final chapter will be read, and Monique will finally understand why she was chosen to hear where the bodies are buried. I have been married 7 times, but only once for love. In a quiet room in Spain, with a piece of string for a ring and no cameras to witness the vows, I finally became the woman I was always meant to be. I am ready to tell you where the bodies are buried, but first, I need you to understand that the story was never about the men, it was always about my wife. The final act of Evelyn Hugo's life did not begin on a red carpet, but on the sun-drenched shores of Spain. After decades of performing for a world that demanded she be someone else, Evelyn finally retreated into a sanctuary of her own making. In the quiet coastal air, the legendary siren began to dissolve, allowing Evelyn Herrera to breathe again. She spoke Spanish freely with her family, the syllables tasting of a heritage she had spent half a century trying to scrub away. Alongside Celia, her brother Robert, and a grieving but recovering Connor, Evelyn found a domestic peace that was untainted by the flashbulbs of Hollywood. In a bedroom overlooking the sea, away from the prying eyes of the press that had mislabeled their love for 40 years, Evelyn and Celia held their own ceremony. There were no designer gowns or diamond-encrusted bands. Instead, Evelyn officiated their union in the quiet of the night, using a simple hair tie as a wedding ring. They exchanged vows that were stripped of artifice, promising a devotion that had already survived scandals, divorces, and a decade of silence. In that moment, bound by a piece of elastic and a lifetime of shared secrets, Evelyn realized that none of her high-profile marriages could ever compare to the gravity of this private, informal I do. It was the only time she had ever been truly home. But the sanctuary was built on borrowed time. Celia was dying, her lungs failing from years of emphysema. For a decade, they lived in the shadow of the inevitable, cherishing the quiet days until the morning Celia died in Evelyn's arms. The loss was a tectonic shift. At the funeral, the paparazzi captured images of a devastated Evelyn sobbing over the grave of her friend, reporting to the world that she was mourning her ex-husband, Harry. Evelyn watched the headlines with a cold, weary detachment. She realized then that the media would always tell the story it wanted to tell. They were stubbornly blind to the truth of her heart, forever casting her in a heterosexual tragedy because they couldn't conceive of her queer reality. Then came the slow, agonizing departure of everyone she loved. Robert passed away, leaving Evelyn to the care of her assistant, Grace. But the final, shattering blow was the death of her daughter, Connor, from breast cancer. When the last pillar of her family fell, the panic entered Evelyn's soul and never left. She was the last one standing in a house of ghosts, a legendary icon with $1 million legacy and no one left to share it with. It was this isolation that fueled her final mission, to set the record straight before she followed them into the dark. In the 2017 penthouse, the air turns electric as Evelyn reaches the end of her ledger. She looks Monique Grant in the eye and delivers the final, devastating blow. She reveals that the man who died in the car crash with Harry, the man Evelyn framed to protect her best friend's reputation, was James Grant, Monique's father. The revelation is an explosion. Monique is no longer a journalist. She is a daughter whose entire history has just been rewritten by the woman sitting across from her. All her life, Monique believed her father had died a drunk driver, a narrative that had tarnished his memory and haunted her family. Now, she learns he was a victim of Evelyn's cold, calculated ruthlessness. Monique pins the elderly icon to the couch in a fit of physical rage, wishing aloud that Evelyn dies alone, just as she has lived. But Evelyn is prepared for the hate. She hands Monique a blood-stained letter, a final piece of evidence from the wreckage. In the letter, James tells Harry that while he loves him more than he thought possible, he cannot leave his wife and daughter. He chose Monique. He chose his family. The letter proves that Monique's father was a man of profound love and integrity, even as he navigated his own secret desires. The two women stand at a crossroads of shared trauma. Evelyn, pragmatically facing her own terminal breast cancer, offers Monique a choice. They can burn the notes and the recordings together, or Monique can take the biography and the millions it will bring. She admits she used Monique, choosing her specifically because of the article Monique wrote on physician-assisted suicide. Evelyn knew she needed a writer who would understand a person's right to choose their own ending, a writer who would be professional enough to finish the book even if she hated the subject. A few days later, they meet for the final photo shoot for Vivant. Evelyn stands before the camera one last time, draped in an emerald green gown that captures the light just as it did in 1959. She is the consummate professional, smiling for the lens even as she says a silent goodbye. Monique realizes that the bright future Evelyn predicts for her is a blessing given by a woman who is about to leave. As Monique walks away from the apartment, she knows Evelyn is going to end her life that night. She struggles with the urge to call the police, to stop the clock, but she realizes that this is Evelyn's final act of control. She grants the icon the dignity she requested, the right to go home to her daughter, her lover, her best friend, and her mother. The news of Evelyn Hugo's death breaks the next morning, an accidental overdose in the early stages of cancer. The world mourns a legendary film siren, a woman of 7 husbands and endless scandals. But Monique is already writing the corrective. She titles the biography The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, knowing the title is a bait-and-switch. The world will buy the book for the gossip about the men, but they will stay for the truth of the woman. In her final piece for Vivant, Monique bridges the gap between the legend and the person. She reveals that while the public has spent decades obsessing over the men who stood beside Evelyn Hugo, they were only ever supporting characters in a much greater story. She tells the world that the only person who truly mattered, the only one who ever truly owned Evelyn's heart, was her wife.